Hey everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad, Gustafson, and I share two books that we love and we think you should read when, Brad?
Right now, people, run.
Right now. We don't call it
Run,
Read
don't
It Later.
walk to the bookstore.
We don't call this Read This Later or Read This Tomorrow or
Read this when you get around to it. Read this some other day. No, it just doesn't ring.
We call it Read It Right Now. Speaking of which, what have you been reading this week, my friend?
I so it's this weird, cool, awesome phenomenon that I never experienced before. And I think I alluded to it last week with and when I say before, I mean like 10 years ago. But lately I've been kind of going into reading realms, puddles. I don't know what the right word is. Buckets. It's not the ladder thing quite. It's more like these little topical journeys that are just enchanted and so fulfilling. So I'm read a book. It's coming out July 21st. So that's like almost tomorrow, right? So this is going to be
Around the
okay.
corner.
Pre-order it now if you're interested. But then also, so I finished this one, and then next week I'm in the middle of a barn burner that ties into this. And I just love reading books that are kind of riffs. They're not on the exact same topic, but yet they closely align enough where it feels like a continuation and you've gone deeper and you have a different understanding for the book you just read. So enough on that side tangent. The book that I wanted to talk about today is really cool. And I think you and I, actually, we had dinner with Alan Gratz. I was going to say we've talked about him before, but we've actually talked with him before.
Yes.
How's that for author name dropping?
Well, let me just say though, I'm going to interrupt and say I wouldn't go so far as to say we really talked with him. We both just kind of sat there like this.
Yeah. Like, is this really happening? Like, pinch me.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, as I was wiping my drool off while kind of listening to him reflect on his writing, anyway, my whole point in mentioning his name is this book has some elements that are reminiscent of what Alan does with some of his historical fiction, which is, I think, the highest compliment I can give in that type of genre. So that was the preface or the build up there. But got a new one by Korman. It's called War Stories. And the really cool thing about this book that I'm drawn to, and I wasn't sure, quite honestly, how I would react to it, but it works out really well. It kind of feels like it goes back and forth between Trevor, the main character, I would assume a teenage boy, and his great-grandfather. So it's Trevor kind of playing video games and thinking he has this vision of what war is just based on stories and games. But then he'll connect and has this really great, deep relationship with his grandpa, who he calls Gigi, great-grandpa. And it kind of is like flashbacking. So you're getting the present day, what's happening. And then it'll go back to a war story from Gigi. And it worked really well. And it was really cool. And it was just neat how Gordon did it. It was just different. And it worked. And it was exciting. And it had that history element that I think Gratz just has mastered. And I think that's all that I had to say about this. So, put this on your radar. Like I said, it's out in 2 weeks' time. And I could say, I don't want to speak for any other reader, but I work in a school and I sometimes kind of pick up on what kids like and sometimes who's reluctant to dive into things. I think there are going to be some kids who really can get hooked by this book, the topic and how it's written, and then want to read more and differently because they can realize like this is really relevant and it's entertaining and it teaches and it does a lot of the other things that educators like to have happen.
I love that. I haven't read War Stories, but I've read plenty of other Gordon Korman books. And back in the day when I was a school librarian, when I would book talk some of his books, I would often call them one of my 100% books. I would say to kids, this is one of my 100% books, which means that every kid I've ever handed this book to, 100% of them have loved it. And that really is true because his books are just so universally fun, accessible. Kids get into them. And what's really great about a Gordon Korman book is that once a kid is hooked, there's like 3 million other ones. He's written so many books that they have so many that they can go to next. So I just love it. I hope he just keeps pumping them out forever.
Yeah, and the cool thing that I kind of started by talking about is like the passion that this stirred in me. And I confess I've always kind of like social studies and history and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
just learning in general, but never did I think I would want to go back and research more about World War One or two. Right now, the other book I'm reading kind of dove in, excuse me, into that. But then after that, I would like to go revisit World War One and just
Mm-hmm.
refamiliarize, just because like literally this kind of lights a fire. It's such good storytelling, but it just hooks you in to want to learn more, and
Yeah.
really, really well done and entertaining. So
Wow. Well, I'm excited. That's great. I actually have a copy of that book, but I haven't read it yet, so I'm excited to dive into it. That's
nice. Well,
great.
this might be a first, Jen. I was glad I was able to beat you to book talking a book, because usually it's you sharing, then I have to go read it, and I book talk it 2 months later. So
No, it doesn't matter anyway. I think I think, it's like, number one, it's a great practice to revisit a book that you've already read. So if I've read one and then you talk about it, it gives me a whole opportunity to revisit that. And then number two, different readers bring different things to the book. So
mhm.
it's great for us to be able to talk about it from two different perspectives. I love that. So
I totally do too, and it is fun. On another tangent, I must be really in a mood today, tangential mood. But like, it's
I
cool
love
to
it.
hear a class of kiddos, or even a small group of adults, all talk about the same book and book talk it just from their
Yes.
perspective, different hooks, different lenses, different things that resonated. That's a cool kind of I don't know, perspective builder, empathy builder.
Agreed. I know not every author feels this way, but a lot of authors that I've had the opportunity to read about or hear talk about this, oftentimes they say that, or some version of this idea, that once the book is in the world,
Hmm.
then really it belongs to the reader. And so when readers say, "Oh, I saw this in the book," or "Did you mean this? Because I thought this meant X, Y, and Z," oftentimes the author has to say yes, because what you bring to the book makes it yours in a way that's totally unique and maybe very different from what they intended, or might be exactly the same. But once it leaves them, it really belongs to the reader. So when you have a group of kids or adults reading a book together, that shared experience, there are some common things in the text, but there's also so many variants that really make the experience so rich. That's why things like book clubs and stuff are so much fun.
Hmm. And I have to be careful not to give anything away, but it's I do have to say this book features some of kind of what we're saying, where there are different people in it who play different, like, varying degrees of roles, and
Hmm.
they experience the war and events differently. It's not just like this one-dimensional perspective by Gorman or by the American forces or Allied forces, and that's
Sure.
a powerful, cool thing too, because I could see readers as they're talking about it maybe making connections to different characters and different perspectives too. So this is definitely I don't know, a deeper. It feels at first like it might be, oh, it's just going to be he's just going to try to merge video games with war. It's not like that at all. There's some great depth to it too.
Wow. Well, that's exciting. I can't wait to read it. I'll have to add it to my pile.
All right, what do you got?
Well, this week there are some similarities between the book that I read and yours, even though on the surface, I would have never guessed that until you book talked War Stories. I would have never guessed that there had been similarities between the book that I read and the one that you did. Before reveal what book I read, though, I want to say something that I learned about myself reading this book. I don't think I really realized how big a fan I am of alternate histories as opposed
Mm,
to historical fiction, which historical fiction, of course, is a fiction book that's set during a historical time period in which the events surrounding it are real, although the stories are maybe based on real events, but are fictional. An alternate history is where it's set in a real moment in history, but something about it has been changed or altered. One of my very favorite books from a couple of years ago was called Dread Nation. And the author is escaping me now. Her last name was Ireland, but I can't remember her first name. And it was this alternate history about the Civil War in which, and here's the switch, all the soldiers that were killed turned into zombies and created a zombie army. And I love that book so much. This book, the book I read this week, which is called Burn by Patrick Ness, and you're getting some clues in the cover there, is set in post-World War II United States around the 1950s. The like scars of World War II are still very much being felt in the country. But the switch, the alternate part of this history is that this is a world in which the United States has just finished World War II, but that for hundreds of years, human beings have been living with, wait for it, dragons. So we have a post-World War II America in which dragons exist, okay? I know, crazy,
It sounds
right?
amazing. And
It is.
It fits this little bucket I've been telling you about. This is my next book I'm going to read. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. That's okay. So what's really, I mean, there's so many interesting parts about this book, and it's a very complex book. There's no way I'm going to be able to hit all of the plot elements in this book talk. But one thing that's really important to know is that dragons and humans, while they coexist, they do so only because of this pretty recent and tenuous treaty in which they've agreed not to try to kill one another. But both species, both dragons and humans, think of the other one as inferior, okay? As though one is the superior race or superior species and the other isn't. The story starts with a young girl who's 16 years old. Her name is Sarah, and she lives and works on a farm with her dad, trying to save their farm because their mom has her mom recently passed away, and there's a lot going on in which their farm is financially sort of underwater. And so Sarah's dad, against all of his better judgment, decides to hire a dragon to clear their fields for them. And in the opening scenes, we hear Sarah's dad warn Sarah not to speak to the dragon, not to tell the dragon her name, not even to refer to the dragon by gender, instead to call it it, okay? Because dad has some prejudices about dragons. But when the dragon arrives, Sarah does in fact talk to him, and she learns that he's actually there to try to save her because he knows that there's someone en route, an assassin, who has been raised and groomed to kill her. And from that moment on, the rest, or at least about another 2/3 of the book, are alternate chapters between Sarah on the farm and the assassin and his journey to come and kill her. And we as readers are just waiting for these two worlds to connect. They don't connect at the end. They actually connect about 1/3 of the way before the end. And then something so incredible happens, I can't even begin to describe it here. And so I'm going to leave that as the cliffhanger. But the book is Burn. Can you see the dragon in there?
It's incredible. Yep.
By Patrick Ness, and the tagline at the end, at the bottom, is, "How does the world end? It ends in fire." Boom, boom, boom.
Unbelievable. That sounds like a book that was written for me.
So good. So good. I loved it so much.
So what grade or age might it appeal to or resonate with?
I think that the story itself, there are plenty of middle schoolers who would love the story of this book. I think the language and structure of it, though, would be a heavy lift for a lot of younger readers. So I would probably recommend it for 7th or 8th graders or above. Or if you have kids who are younger but who are just really voracious, strong readers, they probably would get it on some level. But it's the alternate chapters, the vocabulary. I think it's an older 8th grade-ish book. But as far as the content, totally appropriate for middle school.
Okay, really cool. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's a great one. So we had 2 great books this week.
We do, and you added to my to be read stack, and
as you
eventually
did
my
mine.
on my shopping cart probably too. So
Well, if people want to hear about all the rest of the great books we've recommended, where should they go, Brad?
yeah, and there are a bunch of good books to check out. Go to bit.ly/read_this_now. And we've got a spreadsheet of all the books and even a link to a lot of these conversations if you want the play by play.
Absolutely. Yay. Well, thank you. Have a great week, my friend, and happy
Awesome.
reading, everyone.
Good stuff. Thanks, everyone.